Hi everyone, you're watching The Caffeinated Corporate Lawyer, where we try to make meaningful content to help you better understand the intricacies of corporate law. I hope you guys are absolutely caffeinated because today we are going to kickstart with Chapter 1 of the Companies Act 2013, which contains Section 1 and Section 2. To begin with, the Companies Act 2013 is divided into 29 chapters, 470 sections, 7 supporting schedules, and rules for 29 chapters have been notified till now. I know what you are thinking right now, that all this is a lot to take in. That is why it is very important that you read all the sections along with the rules for once properly, so that you don't have to come back and start from the scratch over and over again. Once you understand the basic concepts and application of law, then you won't see this as just a set of sections and rules, and it would all make sense. So without further ado, let us kickstart with Chapter 1, which is titled as Preliminary and contains Section 1 and Section 2. So first we'll go to the website of MCA and we click on Section 1, and it says that it is an act to consolidate and amend the law relating to companies. So this basically is the main objective of the Companies Act 2013, and August 29, 2013 is the date basically when it received the assent of the President, and it was not notified in the official gazette the very next day, that is 30th August 2013. Then moving on, Section 1 subsection 1 talks about basically the title of the section, that it is called the Companies Act 2013, of course. Section 1 subsection 2 then talks about the extent of the act, that is basically it extends to the whole of India. Section 1 subsection 3 is rather an interesting one. We need to first understand that at that point of time, the company law was undergoing a transition from Companies Act 1956 to Companies Act 2013. Keep this in mind as we go through subsection 3, which says, "This section shall come into force at once, and the remaining provisions of this act shall come into force on such date as the central government may, by notification in the official gazette, appoint, and different dates may be appointed for different provisions of this act, and any reference in any provision to the commencement of this act shall be construed as a reference to the coming into force of that provision." Let us take a moment to analyze this by breaking it up into 3 parts. The first part says, "This section shall come into force at once," which means that they are making a reference to Section 1, that it will come into force immediately as soon as the act receives the assent of the President. If we head to the effective dates list, we can see over here that effective date for Section 1 is given as 29 August 2013. Moving on to Part 2, it says, "The remaining provisions of this Act shall come into force on such date as the central government may, by notification in the official gazette, appoint, and different dates may be appointed for different provisions of this Act." Now, what this means is that the central government, that is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is the competent authority, it will have the power to decide as to on which dates, which particular sections of the Companies Act 2013 would come into force, and it would do so by notifying in the official gazette. Furthermore, it had the freedom to choose and appoint different dates for different provisions to come into force. So we can see that it was important at that point of time to roll out Companies Act 2013 in a calibrated manner, and this power was conferred onto the central government to gradually bring into force all the sections in a phased manner. Now, if we head to the list of effective dates, again we can see that barring 2 sections, all 470 sections have been notified. We can see the effective dates for different sections can range from anywhere between 2014 to 2016. So can we say that the whole 2013 Companies Act has now come into force? The answer to that question would be yes. The only provision of Companies Act 1956 which is still in force is Part 9A, which talks about producer companies. Now, why is it not included as a separate chapter under Companies Act 2013? The reason being that the Parliament had come to a decision that there would be a whole together special act that would be formulated to deal with producer companies. Now, where is this coming from? So this is given under Chapter 29 of the Companies Act 2013, which is titled as Miscellaneous. So if you go to section 465, you will see that it deals with repeal of certain enactments and savings. Section 465, Section 1 says that the Companies Act 1965 stands repealed, with first proviso being that the provisions of Part 9A of the Companies Act 1956 shall be applicable mutatis mutandis to a producer company in a manner as if the Companies Act 1956 has not been repealed until a special act is enacted for producer companies. It is very clear from this proviso that Part 9A would be referred of the Companies Act 1956 till the time a special act is formulated. And the term mutatis mutandis over here means that it would be interpreted considering the changes that may have been made in Part 9A from time to time. Moving on to the third part of subsection 3, which says, any reference in any provision to the commencement of this act shall be construed as a reference to the coming into force of that provision. This means that irrespective of the fact that any provision makes a reference to this section for the commencement of the act, it would always be construed that the said particular provision came into force on the effective date on which it was so notified by the central government. That was all about subsection 3. Now moving on to subsection 4, which talks about the applicability of the Companies Act 2013. Basically, which all entities would be hit by the provisions of the Companies Act 2013. As per Clause A, all the companies which are either incorporated under the Companies Act 2013 or any other previous law would come under the purview of this Act. As per Clause B, C and D, all insurance companies, banking companies and companies which are engaged in the generation and supply of electricity would also be hit by the provisions of this Act. However, it comes with the condition that if at all there is a conflict between the special law governing these companies and Companies Act 2013, then the special act would always prevail over the Companies Act 2013. So for instance, all the banking companies are regulated by the Banking Regulation Act 1949, and if there is any clash between existing provisions of the Banking Regulation Act 1949 and the Companies Act 2013, then the provisions of the Banking Regulation Act would always prevail. So if we see Clause C, it means to say the same, where it says, the provisions of this Act shall apply to banking companies except insofar as the said provisions are inconsistent with the provisions of the Banking Regulation Act 1949. Same goes for Clause E, which says that this Act would be applicable to any company governed under any special Act except insofar as the said provisions are inconsistent with the provisions of such special Act. Now before we read Clause F, it is important to understand a few definitions that you will come time and again as we study Companies Act 2013. Section 2 of the Companies Act 2013, which is also a part of the preliminary chapter, states the most important definitions that are used widely across the Companies Act 2013. So let's see the definition of company which is given under Section 2 Clause 20 of the Companies Act 2013. It says any company which is either incorporated under this Act, that is the Companies Act 2013, or under any previous company law. For instance, Companies Act 1956 would be defined as a company. A very good example is Reliance Textile Industries, which was incorporated under the Companies Act 1956 back in 1985. Now we will look at Section 2 Clause 11, which defines the term body corporate. Note that the definition says body corporate includes and not means. So it says body corporate includes any company incorporated outside India but does not include cooperative society registered under the Society Registration Act or any other notified body corporate. So what this essentially means is that the definition of body corporate is not exhaustive and is rather inclusive in nature, which includes company, limited liability partnership, foreign company, public financial institution, banking company, non-banking financial company, etc. Except all those entities which are said to be not included as a part of the definition of body corporate by the central government. Now for example, Tesla is electric car manufacturing company based out of California, United States of America. Now it is a company which is incorporated outside India and thus it would fall under the definition of body corporate. Now moving on to Clause F, which says that the provisions of this Act shall apply to such body corporate incorporated by any Act for the time being in force as the central government may, by notification, specify in this behalf, subject to such exceptions, modifications or adaptations as may be specified in this notification. Now what this means is that the power is conferred onto the central government to decide if any particular provisions of the Companies Act 2013 would be applicable to a body corporate along with such conditions, modifications as it may deem fit. So for instance, let's take a hypothetical example that the central government may decide that certain provisions of the Companies Act 2013, say Section 92, which deals with filing of the annual returns, becomes applicable to a limited liability partnership the same way as it is applicable to a company. So this would be valid. Here's a small exercise for you guys. Google about any company which you have come across in recent times while reading the newspaper or while watching YouTube, and analyze whether it would fall under the category of a company or a foreign company or a body corporate, and tell me about it in the comment section. This brings us to an end to section 1 of the Companies Act 2013. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.